Hello and welcome to PM Trick session. This time we'll talk about teamwork challenges and how to address them. This session will cover some most common steps around dealing with the conflict and working with the team. So a project is always a team effort. It's very rare when a project is done single-handedly, and it's abnormal situation. The team, the people that make the project team, is the driver of the change that is the project. So all the tasks are handled by the team members. Execution on the plan is done by teams, and this requires careful administration and coordination from project manager. And it is a fine art. It's not easy. You have to manage team, foster collaboration, and be able to evaluate performance all while reaching the project goals. This creates tension and leaves potential space for conflict. And this is normal. Conflict is part of change. You cannot just avoid it. So let's have a look at some other steps around team challenges, team management challenges. I'll talk more about potential common challenges. First one is decreased performance level. So employees may experience periods of time where they are not as productive as usual. This decrease in productivity can affect other team members, other stakeholders, and overall project goals. So you need to make sure that employees are motivated. Managers who consistently review process and procedures within the company increase efficiency. Performing a workflow analysis to review the current system and to restructure the weak areas is one way to deal with this. Another way is to address the challenge by asking questions and offering solutions to the problems. So one-on-one meetings with the team members is a great opportunity for managers to reestablish work hours and potentially evaluate expectations regarding work productivity, both from project manager side and from team member side. So performance decrease is a red flag that a manager needs to keep an eye on while discussing with their subordinates, their team. And this should be done individually. Managers should also understand when there is a need to fill a gap in their team, like have a new hire or have a transfer from another division. It's also necessary to understand if there is a lack of resources in terms of actual positions within the team. So whenever necessary, it's good to ask for help when analyzing staffing. And whenever analyzing staffing issues, it's also a good idea to evaluate from budget perspective, since it's quite natural for majority of companies to work understaffed due to budgetary restrictions. And project manager needs to be able to call for help whenever there is a need to improve staffing situation if team is not able to fulfill the current duties, current tasks without extra help. So whenever working on filling out the positions within the team, don't hesitate to request assistance from executive sponsors, from HR department, if there is such a possibility for the project manager to request such help. It's also a good idea to highlight a risk if there is a staffing issue and outline it for the executive sponsors, for the key stakeholders of the project. Don't leave this problem lingering, since the team is what drives the project, and having insufficient staff can lead to, first of all, high risk of overload and tension, and in the end create conflict. Another challenge is communication problems when overseeing teams and when ensuring effective communication within the team and outside of the team. Every team member has a different personality, and it's easy to create miscommunication situation when person just not understand what was communicated, or it was communicated in a way that person assumes something different. Maybe you need to reevaluate your communication plan when you face such a situation, such as having higher frequency of communication to keep your project team aware of what's happening and what to expect from the team when performing the project. Make sure to always outline when you want something done, like due date. If necessary, you should redefine the communication standards that reinforce team's goals and purposes. And also a good element, and we talked about this before, majority of projects are managed through project management software. They have implemented communication layer in these software platforms. So need to evaluate before you launch the project what is the most efficient communication platform. That it would be efficient for the team to communicate, convenient for everyone to share the information, and to know the status of your communication, that nothing is missed. Sometimes employees may lose focus on collaboration and instead focus on some more mundane tasks that don't necessarily serve highest purpose towards the reaching project goals, such as dealing with individual tasks. In such case, managers need to revisit the actual goals of the project, the purpose of the project, and re-evaluate this for the team, for the individual team members, so that that the team can acknowledge what are the actual high goals, the goals that the key goals of the project. Also, managers need to take time to acknowledge efforts of the team and stress out the purpose of the work that they are doing to see a higher level of motivation. Considering to divide your team into partner system, to have a chance to work with someone else for a specific project helps quite a bit. Having team building exercises is another great way to help everyone learn how to work better. And even if you're hard in the middle of the project, it's never a bad idea to have a certain step back to reevaluate how team works together through these team building exercises. So it's a good idea to base the contents of the exercise around the challenges that you face. And for instance, if you don't know, if team doesn't know how to work better with each other, maybe this exercise need to focus on relationship building. Often teams question the transparency of the management decisions, especially when they feel distanced from their superiors. And it's quite a normal situation when employees feel that they do more work than the others, especially when they don't see the work that the others are doing. So working in silos, as it said. And people don't feel that they're part of the plan, that they are actually doing something purposeful that drives their activities towards the project goals. And in that case, the level of trust towards the management decisions, towards the project manager, getting compromised. The solution is to have clear communication and honest interactions in order to resolve this worker skepticism. This is needed to build trust between project team member and the manager. Delegating tasks and explaining why you are assigning these tasks helps in establishing buy-in of the particular employee to the project cause, and feel purpose, have a sense of purpose when executing the project. Sometimes managers oversee employees who cause tension in the workplace. It's not an unusual situation, but it's a very difficult thing to handle. And knowing how to properly address any issue before these issues become major problems is the most common challenge managers face. To address specific concerns and request feedback from your team members, and to learn about any issues they may have with the work or communication with other team members is crucial for a project manager to implement to avoid interpersonal conflict. You might implement any feasible suggestion to show that you're listening to your team. Make sure you take time to listen to the concerns and find out what you can do about the situation if you're hearing some problem or conflict from an employer. If you're unsure what to do next, never be afraid to asking for help from either HR professional, HR department, or executive sponsor. After all, it's a team effort. It's dealing with personal conflict is part of the job. In fact, a project manager might be spending more time dealing with managing the team rather than actually driving the project, in order to make it work efficiently down the road and focus on the project goals down the road. Another thing that creates conflict, creates a sense of unease, is the pressure to perform. And that impacts both managers and the team. And managers, especially the new managers, feel like they are under pressure to show the best they can from the very beginning of their role. And that creates stress, that creates a feeling of unsatisfaction, and possibly thinking that you're not doing something correctly, which from manager perspective creates huge tension and huge potential conflict within the overall project execution and the team itself. But also it can have the same situation with the project team member, where project team member might feel pressure to perform and trying to give the best they can. Instead, leaders and team members alike need to be able to share their view, and both the project team member and project manager must be able to share his expectations from the team members to ensure that they are not stressing out too much. They're focused on achieving exactly what is expected. And the same way, project manager needs to be able to evaluate what they're doing and understand that where they're making mistakes or actually doing good, in order to avoid stressing out they're not doing good enough. Absence of structure is another common challenge that managers face in the workplace, and that can be inherited from company culture, from company organization, especially when dealing with pre-assigned teams. And the team might not have full awareness of what to do, whom to reach out when dealing with certain tasks that require more than one person engagement. So depending on the work environment, some teams need to be supervised closer than the others in order to maintain the necessary productivity levels. And any capable manager needs to take time to develop organizational structure, if possible, within the project team, to help employees know what is expected from them, what are their roles, where these roles are positioned, at least within the project team. And if possible, to have a greater sense of the company structure that helps in providing and delivering the best project performance possible, including reaching the actual project goals. So this approach also helps your team build respect, build trust towards the project manager, and encourage loyalty. Since managers are responsible for receiving the members of their team and communicating with other departments or other stakeholders, it might create a conflict in the sense of time management, a struggle to balance their own tasks. One way to deal with this is to prioritize your own work responsibilities by scheduling time throughout the day to do specific work and letting your team know the time when you're available for them and the times when you actually want to focus on your direct work, and you'll be unreachable for any expertise, consultancy, or whatnot with the team. Making sure to have synchronized calendars and that both you and the team input your tasks and your schedules in these calendars is beneficial. In fact, using project management software helps here greatly because you can, first of all, input all your tasks and your team can input all their tasks with their schedule, with their availability time, and share it across the team to ensure that everyone is aware of who is available when. Here you need to make sure to implement discipline, that every task that is scheduled needs to go into calendar, and tasks that require full dedication need to be marked as such to avoid distractions. Lack of support from executive team is yet another challenge. It depends really on the ulterior motives of the executive stakeholders, of the project sponsors. And greatly also depends on organizational culture, how the decisions are made. And in this situation, a decision-making process might require approvals or input or decisions from executive sponsors, executive stakeholders. And if there is no adequate support, no adequate response, it can slow down decision-making process itself and overall progress of the team and project execution. And in the end, might actually lead to project failure. So the most important thing to do within the project team to avoid tensions is to be honest with the team members, to let them know that, for instance, particular decision is waiting for input from the executive team, and if possible, reassign team members to other tasks if certain tasks are blocked. For the project manager to expedite decision-making process if there is no adequate support from executive team, having one-on-one meetings with executive managers is one way to expedite this progress. Possibly if there is no direct line of communication with executive stakeholder, you might want to reach out to the project sponsor in order to drive this gap in support and communication. And having this information also important to be captured within communication plan and risk management plan. Quite often, project managers start from their environment. They transition from being co-worker of their project team to a manager of the team. And people who get promoted often find themselves managing their old teammates. This situation may feel awkward, especially at first, but with time and right leadership, this might be less of an issue or completely non-issue. In that case, you need to ensure that team members understand that you are there to support their efforts and to ensure that they have everything they need to accomplish the project goals, to execute their tasks. And good practice before you transition to the new role is to have a meeting with your future team to explain your transition, to address the change in roles, and to communicate that you're changing the position and will be managing the team, and let the team have opportunity to ask questions and voice concerns. So it's very important. Workplace culture can at times be a challenge and a source of conflict, especially when teams don't feel that they're connected to the rest of the company, or they don't feel like they're part of the overall organization. They're not working towards common goal. And that's also a common situation when organizations work in silos. This decreases motivation, this impacts overall performance, and can create risk for the success of the project. Teams that feel that they're part of a larger group experience more confidence and trust. One way to promote a strong work culture is by planning mutual work and mutual timeouts with other departments. Teams work best when you have steps planned in advance. If you work with a team on a project and you worked with this team before, it's always easier to manage project approach and project structure with already familiar faces. Reusing possible documentation from old projects, if project is similar in nature, helps greatly here. And basically getting information from lessons learned is one of the common ways of decreasing efforts needed to plan for the new project. Still, whenever starting a new project, make sure to adjust and tailor the team and the processes in accordance to the plan that you develop to match the current project. When planning new projects, make sure you take note of potential problems and conflicts, especially if you work with the same team from previous projects, where you might have better knowledge and understanding of interpersonal relations. And make sure to capture potential team risks within the risk management plan. Planning for trouble, planning for risks is crucial when drafting overall project plan. And so risk management plan should include potential conflicts and team management issues. So let's talk about team conflicts resolution. First, you need to increase awareness of the symptoms. You cannot just ignore team members' potential snide remark if it creates actually a harmful pattern. You shouldn't comment on the less than optimal behavior. You should address it, actually, and send a clear message that certain behavior wouldn't be tolerated. But make sure not to overdo this, because if behavior is within certain acceptable limits, maybe you should just ignore it, depending on rules within the company and overall culture. Setting ground rules for conduct is important, especially when done during the initial project scoping and project planning stage, so that your team was aware of what are the rules, how the work is done. For instance, having expected responses to the emails, that they must be enforced. Conflict resolution should be done in a consistent way with planned rules. So having a set of rules for the team is important. Building trust is another important element in avoiding team conflict. Leaders that lead by example and have respect and trust from the team members less likely to face team conflicts within the team, and people who have some problems or experience certain unease are more willing to discuss this with a respected and trusted team manager. So this shouldn't be just a relationship between the project manager, the team manager, and the team member, but also on the level between the team members. And capable project manager will sure to foster such environment where team members are at ease of discussing potential conflicts with each other and resolving them on their own without need to engage managers. So every team member needs to know that they're able to discuss the conflicts, and that they're also responsible for building trust and avoiding conflict to manage it before the conflict escalates. So the managers need to have certain resolution skills. It's a fine art. You cannot just learn it by reading, but still there are several points that the project manager and team manager needs to know. First of all, you need to be proactive. For instance, a person is asking for a conflict or provides inappropriate personal remarks, and you don't want to include them, for instance, in an email chain for that reason. Doesn't look like a good sign. So it's a good idea to spot conflict, potential risk of conflict, and you shouldn't avoid it and leave it to the team members or HRs to resolve, which is fine balance, because some elements of human communication should be left for team members to resolve, but still project manager need to be on the watch for any potential brewing conflict that cannot be resolved easily. So you should take action, and you should show your team that you treat the conflict seriously and wouldn't condone destructive behavior. Observing for the signs of conflict is also important. The signs can be subtle, but you can detect them by being aware of the interactions within your team. And it's harder in remote teams, but still should be observed as much as possible. During face-to-face meetings or meetings with videos, that's why video calls are important. You should watch out for body language, crossed arms or leaning away from people. Facial expressions, tone of voice. It's a fine art of psychology, but something that you should keep an eye on. And knowing your team members, you'll pick up on cues and spot tensions that may be lurking under the surface. The manager must be fair and impartial. Even if you agree with one or more of individuals in the conflict, you should remain objective. Give time for everyone to present their own perspective of the events and to respond to any criticism. It's vital that all parties are able to state the case and they are listened to. Step in when needed. So be sure not to allow certain individuals to dominate the conversation or bully the reserved colleagues. If one person is constantly taking over the conversation or interrupting others, make sure that you keep your questions directed at the person being interrupted to let them voice their position. If people still attempt to interrupt, politely ask them to wait until their coworker has finished speaking before inviting the other point of view. Avoid assumptions. Any good manager avoids assumptions and bases decisions only on facts. So when facilitating a conflict discussion, avoid stating as facts things that you only think you know or may have heard that are not backed by facts. So use phrases like "as far as I'm aware" or "as I understand it" during the conversation. This also allows you the possibility to understand what is, if you made a mistake or your understanding is incomplete, and creates an opportunity for the conflicting parties to restate their case and to clarify misunderstandings. And patience. Resolving team conflict can take time, especially with volatile, arrogant, or domineering personalities. It can take time to resolve a conflict. It can also be a challenge to engage introverted or uncommunicative employees. It's a normal situation. All people are different. So it's important to be patient and observe. So conflict identification. Basically, you need to identify the source of conflict. Everybody is different, and difference in personalities can lead to a conflict. And the project manager's responsibility is to deal with it. So when identifying the source of conflict, you need to ask every opposing team member to explain their side clearly and calmly. Possibly have each person provided a written statement in simple terms, or use one-on-one communication. Make sure to collect responses from each person. For virtual and hybrid teams, consider using certain document systems or forms to fill out position of their response and the view on the conflict. With on-site teams, it's possible to have a face-to-face discussion for opposing teams engage in the discussion, and make sure to set firm boundaries to ensure respectful communication with zero tolerance for basically any destructive behavior. Once you have collected all the information, you need to analyze all the facts of the situation. Using decision-making process, make sure to work towards a solution that's acceptable and doable for all team members. This resolution might take time to actually reach and might require several attempts to find common ground. Then you need to make sure to put agreed upon solution into practice and monitor progress. You need to enact the decided steps, and it's necessary to make sure and watch for any potential adjustments that should be made. And then you evaluate how well the solution worked and whether it's applicable in a long-term basis. Note if any changes need to be made to improve the process. Make sure to collect them and apply as a change management process. Effectively managing conflict minimizes the incidence of relational conflict in the workplace and still can creep in. Virtual, remote, or hybrid teams can be more vulnerable to relational conflict, and relying on the technology as a primary or only means of communication can create difficulties in establishing shared context, building rapport, and navigating cultural differences. So to reiterate, the conflict management steps require basically speaking to every team member individually. This is important, making sure to actually discuss face-to-face potential issues and have regular cadence where you can speak in unrestricted environment to each team member. When you have conflict details from each team member individually, you can bring people together to discuss in a more wide discussion area, in maybe some sort of a forum approach. If unsure or have some conflicting views of the conflict, you can ask for a wider team, for stakeholders, especially executive stakeholders and human resources team, for help in resolving particular conflict and collect all that info. Make sure to draw a plan towards the conflict resolution. Having a proper plan to resolve any particular conflict will help in having effective resolution for the conflict. Once you have a plan drafted up, make sure to enact this plan and follow up on the steps that are being placed into action. And make sure to react if certain steps are not being properly executed. You might need to make sure that every person is having a specific task to execute as a part of the plan, and you need to hold all the relevant parties accountable. So there needs to be a report for all the actions of the particular plan. Some people might still feel aggrieved and just avoiding resolution as part of overall plan, but not wanting to actually to drag things out. So you can use additional one-on-one meetings to prevent all disagreements from resurfacing, and maybe using, for instance, anonymous team survey to get feedback and reveal any lingering frustration. Seeking conflict resolution guidance and support is important during this, if necessary. If you're faced with challenging conflict situation, you should seek support either from your executive sponsor on the project, your manager, or HR department. If efforts in conflict resolution don't work, you'll need to be willing to pursue formal procedures if necessary. And in some situations, such as harassment, discrimination, or bullying, might require to enforce formal disciplinary process to follow. In these instances, if you're in doubt, make sure to talk to your HR team for advice. When the conflict is deemed to be over, no longer impacting anyone, you need to reflect on the conflict management skills and see what was done right, and if there are any improvements that you need to place into action for the future activities. And having this in transparent manner is also important. So make sure to review your actions with your line manager, for instance. Don't keep the feedback that you receive for your own assessment of the handling skills that you put in place just to yourself. And finally, some tips for avoiding relational conflict in workplace. To reiterate from some of the previous points, building trust is important to avoid in avoiding conflict and making sure that not only team members trust the manager or you as a project manager, but also trust each other. And, having mutual trust is key to avoiding relational conflict. Having rules of conduct set in place before any project even started and regularly revised for update if needed is important, and the project manager is responsible for this. And project manager and the team manager needs to be aware of the conflict symptoms and must be on watch out to be ready to resolve conflict when needed.